I recognize the distinguished delegate from the Russian Federation. You have the floor, sir.
Спасибо, господин.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, distinguished colleagues. I've taken the floor to once again return to the matter which our delegation raised at the organizational meeting on the 3rd of October. Since then, 2.5 weeks have passed. We rightly consider that over this time period, substantial changes have taken place in the situation that formed as a result of the actions of the authorities of the United States of America. I mean removing the barriers to the free access of representatives of UN member states to the headquarters of the organization to participate in the work of its organs. However, no progress to improve or resolve this situation has taken place since that moment. Therefore, I am forced to once again give a new overview of the state of affairs when it comes to the United States' compliance with their obligations under the 1947 Headquarters Agreement and the negative consequences which could result from the continuing discriminatory policy of the United States in respect of a number of UN member states. I shall go through it point by point. Firstly, work in the UN and its organs is based on the Charter enshrined fundamental principles that no state has the right to violate those or, at their discretion, interpret them as they see fit. One of those principles is that all agreements and treaties must be complied with unconditionally. In the approaches of the United States to this fundamental agreement between the UN and the host country, we can see gross violations of this principle. One can hardly speak of any confidence in the interactions, any trust in the interactions with the United States if the American authorities, in spite of the clear provisions of the 1947 Host Country Agreement, have now for around 30 years already been flouting the rights of UN member states to have fully fledged participation in the activities of its organs. Another important principle is the equality of all UN member states. In breaching their obligations under the 1947 agreement, the United States is brazenly undermining this principle. Because their experts are not able to participate in UN events, because of this arbitrary visa policy of the United States authorities, other states end up in a comparatively worse position compared with the conditions that prevail for the United States themselves. The result is that Washington can very easily bring to bear a powerful team of experts to address any item on the agenda of the First Committee. At the same time, other countries at any moment may find themselves deprived of that opportunity. This further compounds their unequal position compared with the United States, which in some cases, also due to economic, social, and domestic political problems, is already often comparably worse than that in America. For us, a situation in which the United States is consistently abusing their obligations as the UN host country is categorically unacceptable. I underscore that we are talking about obligations here. And for unclear reasons, for a while now, Washington has decided to look upon these obligations as something of a whim. And I remind you that these obligations are linked to the privilege bestowed upon the United States to host the United Nations, our shared home. This privilege places particular responsibility upon the shoulders of the host country to ensure the normal functioning of the organization. The latter stipulates the possibility for the full participation of absolutely all states with no exception in the work of its organs and entities. The host country in this respect must ensure the unquestioned fulfillment of that opportunity, whether it wishes to do so or not, and whether it likes it or not. In the visa problems, we can see Washington's complete neglect and scorn for that responsibility. In this particular case, we are talking about a state that is a permanent member of the UN Security Council, that has nuclear weapons, and which, among other things, bears particular responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. This gives rise to a legitimate question. If the United States shows such scorn for its status as the host country, will they approach matters of peace and security in an equally irresponsible fashion? Although, taking into account the historical experience of the end of the 20th and the first 2 decades of the 21st century, this is probably mostly a rhetorical question. I'll now move from the general to the specifics. Over the last 2.5 weeks, we have not seen any practical steps taken by the United States to improve the situation of issuing visas to members of foreign delegations, including the Russian delegation, which were supposed to participate in the work of the First Committee. Moreover, the last meeting of the Committee on Relations with the Host Country demonstrated that the US authorities are not planning to change their position and see their discriminatory or revise their discriminatory visa policy. And this is in spite of the fact that this question is being raised in a tangible fashion. It is an acute problem and has a robust legal basis underpinning it. The representative of the United States in the Committee on Relations with the Host Country very clearly led us to believe that, based on national security concerns, visas would not be issued. In so doing, the full-fledged participation of the Russian delegation and that of a number of other delegations is essentially being blocked. We believe it is entirely unjustified and also strange to say that the issuing of visas to foreign representatives coming to participate in UN events is based on national security concerns. If the United States sees in the work of the UN and the participation of foreign delegates in its work any threat to its national security, then it's time to raise the question of moving the organization's headquarters from New York to some other city. Thus far, all UN member states have seen this organization as one of the most important multilateral mechanisms to come up with measures to maintain international peace and ensure global security. And not just the US, and it's only the US, for some strange concerns, is declaring about security, which, the insecurity rather, which the UN seems to represent for it. Thirdly, Over these past 2.5 weeks, we have enjoyed considerable support from states whose representatives have also fallen foul of the US's discriminatory visa policy. Moreover, many delegations have expressed their compassion and understanding of our position. I would like to express gratitude also to those who are doing everything they can to support the position of the Russian Federation and those who are sincerely sorry for us. However, we raised the matter of the US compliance with its obligations under the 1947 agreement, not because we wanted to receive understanding and compassion, but so that, together with our colleagues in this most authoritative UN committee, we could declare that we categorically reject the US's discriminatory policy. We have called and we continue to call upon all of our colleagues in the committee to send unambiguous signals to the United States that this policy is unacceptable and that the position of Washington, which ignores its obligations under the 1947 agreement, is intolerable. If delegations do not respond to our appeal and refrain from expressing their disagreement with this destructive policy of the United States, this could lead to the most dire consequences for the international disarmament mechanism. Without showing joint determination on this matter, if we were to not do that, we would be expressing our consent to the US continuing its arbitrary behavior, imposing its opinion on everybody and putting unprecedented pressure on any state that does not agree with it. This scenario cannot be allowed. I would once again like to underscore that appealing to the First Committee is a measure we have been forced to take, caused by the fact that of late the situation of the issuing of visas to foreign representatives has dramatically deteriorated. For my delegation alone, I can confirm this unfortunate fact. Last year, there was only one expert whose American visa application was rejected. A key member of the Russian delegation, however, did not get a visa. The head, Konstantin Varanyov, the head of the Department of the Russian Foreign Ministry, who works directly on multilateral disarmament affairs, including the First Committee of the UN General Assembly. This year, 8 members of our delegation have not received visas. That is to say, almost half of the members of the delegation. Those people include not only people from the Russian Foreign Ministry, but also representatives of the Ministry of Defense and Roscosmos, the state corporation, who were supposed to participate in the thematic discussions, side events, and also consultations on draft resolutions. If we were to talk about the underrepresentative nature of the Russian delegation at the 74th session of the General Assembly in general, then 18 people in total were refused American visas. Against the backdrop of this targeted strike against the Russian delegation, this cynical abuse is what the proposal of the American colleagues to jointly work on coming up with single resolutions on confidence-building measures in space and international information security. It looks like cynical behavior. We are particularly baffled by their readiness to send to New York, to that end, their own team of experts. In other words, we're being presented with a one-sided game. of the overwhelming numerical expert advantage of the United States. And repeating the words of our well-known sports commentator, saying that we don't need to play that sort of hockey game. This visa pressure has also been exerted upon other states, impacting the composition of their delegations and also their ability to constructively and in detail have a thorough dialogue on the most pressing issues on the agenda of the First Committee. In so doing, the USA is directly and in a focused manner undermining the work of this UN organ. In ignoring our appeals and our communications to resolve the situation as quickly as possible, the United States is blocking the work of the First Committee. And that fact is a fact that they cannot dismiss out of hand, as they have been doing in respect of their obligations under the 1947 agreement. We turned to the First Committee to send a powerful signal to the American authorities on behalf of the 193 delegations to the effect that this arbitrary visa behavior is categorically unacceptable. Fourthly, here, behind the scenes, opinions have been expressed that this so-called visa question is exclusively bilateral in nature. These judgments don't hold water, both from a political and legal point of view. It is not Russia, but rather the United States that is the host country of the United Nations. It's not Russia, but it's the United States that voluntarily took upon itself the obligations contained in the 1947 agreement to host the United Nations headquarters. Nobody compelled them to do that. It wasn't Russia, but it was the United States that bound itself to ensure free access to representatives of states to UN headquarters. The Russian delegation came to New York not to have bilateral discussions with the American colleagues, but rather to consider in a multilateral format with other UN member states the most acute and sensitive matters of international security. In this specific case, the Russian Federation is speaking on behalf of and in support, with the support of a number of states, a large number of states who have suffered from the high-handed behavior of the US authorities. I'm not going to repeat the figures and the time frames that have been mentioned and which were mentioned during the Committee on Relations with the Host Country on the 15th of October. I shall simply say one thing. The indifference that the United States for several decades now has been demonstrating in response to the fair and just requests from member states is simply shocking. Now, this state of affairs can no longer be tolerated. We no longer intend to put up with this. We shall consistently make every effort to ensure that the United States change its position on its own obligations under the 1947 agreement. We hope for the support and solidarity of other member states of the UN in this. Nobody other than the United States is able to resolve this visa problem. The American authorities must, in full, acknowledge the full consequences of the policy that they have chosen as the guiding line of their policy in respect of other UN member states, who, for one reason or another, Washington no longer likes. Fifthly, over these last 2.5 weeks, we have heard from various quarters that the First Committee is not the right platform to raise and discuss visa problems. Several members of other delegations have told us this, as well as representatives of the UN Secretariat and civil society. I will agree that the mandate of the First Committee does not provide for the discussion of matters which fall within the purview of the Committee on Relations with the Host Country. However, we were not planning to discuss visa problems, nor were we planning to discuss our relations with anybody at all. We raised the question of the effective functioning of the First Committee, which is being hindered by the discriminatory visa policy of the United States. And in the broader context, the contempt shown by the American authorities for their obligations under the 1947 agreement. The normalization of the work of the First Committee is what we were talking about 2 weeks ago and what we're talking about now. I remind you, distinguished colleagues, that in the purview of our committee, according to document A/C.1/74/1, in addition to matters of substance on the agenda, there is also the matter of revitalizing the work of the General Assembly, ensuring the effective work of the First Committee, and supporting the thorough discussion of all substantive items on its agenda, in full, completely falls under that agenda item on the General Assembly's agenda. This is a matter of principle for us, which directly impacts the future of the First Committee and the future of arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation. It will not be possible to adopt any robust decision if, because of the will of one delegation only, which we together gave power in respect of the United Nations, will then consistently work to undermine the First Committee of our organization. I would like to draw attention to the fact that this is not the first time we are seeing attempts by the United States to destabilize the work of one of the elements of the UN's international multilateral disarmament mechanism. During the Conference on Disarmament in 2018 and in 2019, the United States sabotaged the work of that body during the Syrian and Venezuelan presidencies. Number 6. All attempts to accuse Russia of blocking the work of the First Committee are absurd. We, along with the vast majority of delegations, are sincerely interested in a constructive, impartial, comprehensive, and objective discussion of the agenda of the First Committee. As a state which is also a permanent member of the UN Security Council, the Russian Federation is fully aware of its responsibility for coming up with solutions that can resolve the most acute problems in the sphere of arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation, which in turn should help to strengthen international peace and global security. The seriousness of our interest in the normal work of the First Committee is also confirmed by the initial makeup, the initial composition of our delegation, which, in addition to representatives of the Foreign Ministry, also included experts from other Russian ministries and departments. We were prepared for a thorough and professional dialogue with other delegations, without any exceptions, and on the entire agenda of the First Committee. However, the US authorities, by not issuing visas to half of the Russian delegation, severely restricted our ability to participate in that dialogue. further evidence of our desire to participate actively and fruitfully in the work of the First Committee of the 74th session of the UN General Assembly is our submission of the drafts of 4 resolutions and 1 decision, as well as our readiness to discuss the drafts of such documents that have been submitted by other delegations. Moreover, we welcomed the desire of delegations to overcome procedural difficulties and get down to discussing the substantive agenda. We agreed to hold the general debate so that states could realize their right to declare which subjects were priorities for them and say the matters that, according to their opinion, needed the most prompt action for international peace and regional and international security. There were also no barriers to the official presentation by states of their draft resolutions and decisions for the consideration of the First Committee. All of this is weighty proof of Russia's commitment and attachment to the effective functioning of the multilateral disarmament mechanisms of the United Nations. So there are no grounds to accuse us of blocking or undermining the work of the First Committee. We stand ready, along with other delegations, to discuss and determine the course of our joint efforts in the international community in the sphere of arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation. And in so doing, by making use of the full potential of the First Committee. Seven. A key principle for the First Committee when considering organizational and procedural questions has traditionally been the principle of consensus. Any vote at the initial stages of the work of the committee has been seen as something that belongs outside the UN and which does not help to maintain an atmosphere that is conducive for substantive discussions. We fully agree with that approach. The committee's program of work must be adopted by consensus. However, this is only possible if there are no factors present, including external factors, that hinder the work of the forum's the beginning of the forum's substantive work. But even in such extreme circumstances, we should nevertheless still aim for consensus, because the lack of consensus would be yet another sign of a deep-rooted crisis that has taken hold in this exceptionally important area for international security, namely arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation. Over many years, we have seen another sign of this crisis. I am referring to the falling number of draft resolutions year on year, which is approved by the First Committee by consensus. Last year, less than half of the total were approved in that way. This year, there could be even fewer. Only those who are taking destructive steps to undermine the entire architecture of international security have an interest in this, and they do not sniff at any measures to do so. In order to avoid an exacerbation of this crisis, the Russian delegation stands ready, in close cooperation with other delegations, to find a compromise so that we can together continue our substantive work in the First Committee. I will just say a few more words. If the United States does not use the breathing room that we may give them, the Russian Federation will be forced to firmly insist on moving the work of the First Committee and also the UN Disarmament Commission to Geneva or Vienna. We are also not opposed to considering any other venue for these forums that have the necessary infrastructure for their work. We see this as the only possible solution to the problem of access for foreign representatives to UN events. If the United States continues to refuse to take any real measures to resolve the visa problem. Those who have any doubt as to the rectitude of this proposal, I would like to ask them a question. Are they prepared to guarantee that soon the United States will do away with its discriminatory policy and issue visas to all members of delegations that are preparing to visit New York to participate in a whole number of very important international events? In particular, in the Conference on a Nuclear Weapons-Free Zone and a zone free of other weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East, the session of the UN Disarmament Commission, the review conference of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 2020. Is the UN Secretariat prepared to guarantee that this situation of access to UN headquarters will not be repeated during the next session of the First Committee, and that all experts sent from capital will be able to attend all of the aforementioned events? I would also like to recall our demand that the First Committee be given a report of the efforts that have been undertaken by the UN Secretariat to resolve the visa problem, and also concrete proposals to rectify it. Moreover, we also ask the UN Secretariat to give an unambiguous assessment of the United States discriminatory policy in respect of the delegations of other states. So far, we have not heard any report with proposals or the assessment that we asked for. We trust that during meetings with senior officials of the Secretary-General on disarmament, Ms. Nakamitsu, the High Representative, we hope that this will be resolved. The Russian delegation insists upon this because we cannot see any tangible results from the efforts of the Secretariat to resolve the visa problem. If the High Representative is unable to alleviate our concerns, then let the Secretary-General himself speak on all of these matters before the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For my thanks, distinguished colleagues, and I would like to express my thanks for the excellent interpretation that was provided. Thank you for their professional work.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation